Hi, my name is Ola Brown, and I'm going to be talking about probably the subject that I'm most passionate about in the whole world, which is why investing in Africa makes sense. And it reminds me of a time when America was a really scary place for European investors to invest, and J.P. Morgan actually established his reputation as a banker by traveling to Europe and convincing European investors to invest in this scary place that they'd never been to called America. And what JP Morgan, or the process that investors used to take, was investors in Germany and in Austria, wealthy families, would have to transport solid gold cash from Austria and Germany and France into London to be shipped physically in a ship across to New York because there was no electronic transfer to bankers like JP Morgan, who would then invest in America and invest that money. And he would invest it in infrastructure, he would invest it with governments, and the returns from to investors were higher in America than they could get in Europe. But then when he made the profits, he had to go through the process of collecting all that money from different states in America, getting it all into New York in physical cash and shipping it back and then distributing it physically back to all of those investors in Europe. And JP Morgan had one of his most famous quotes where he said, "I'm not in the business of finance, I'm in the business of trust." Because it took a high degree of trust for these investors that had never seen America, that had only heard about this country, to believe that one man was not going to run away with their money and they were going to get these high investments. And what were the things about America at the time that made it so attractive? There was a huge infrastructure deficit, which means they needed to build those roads, they needed to build their rail, they needed to, get money for development. Also, the population was fast growing. But the disadvantages of America were that it was scary. People didn't really understand it, people didn't know about it, but people that were willing to take the risk made a huge amount of money. And people that bet on the right kind of bankers, like JP Morgan, who had high integrity and had the sort of financial expertise to select the right investments on their behalf and give them the returns, made a lot of money. And I think the same thing has happened with China, where China again was scary. Sort of 20, 30 years ago, people really didn't know what China was going to become. A lot of people hadn't traveled to China, but they knew that it was fast growing. They knew that it was an economy that lacked infrastructure, had a lot of basic needs, but had a high, big consumer class that was ready to consume. And it was growing super fast, one of the fastest growing populations in the world at the time. And again, people that found trusted investors in China to bring their money from Europe and America that had already developed with European money back to China made a lot of returns for taking that risk and taking that bet on that fast-growing economy. And I see the same thing happening in Africa, and that's what I'm going to discuss today. So a bit about me. My name is Ola Brown, and I'll be talking about myself a bit more in the next slide. I'm going to talk about healthcare. I'm going to talk about fintech because I run a company called HealthCap, and these are the two areas we invest. And then I'm going to give you 7 big reasons to invest in Africa. So my name is Dr. Ola Brown. I'm a I started life at least as a medical physician in the UK working in emergency medicine. I then received a Japanese scholarship to do genomic work and gene therapy work in Japan. I then moved to Nigeria, where I set up an emergency services company that has now served 47 out of 54 African countries, serving emergency needs, emergency equipment, emergency transport, all over the continent. I got into financial services about 2015-16 when I got the opportunity to run my first venture fund investing in technology. That fund did very well in terms of returns. I also used the opportunity to take a master's in finance and economic policy before going on to start my PhD in finance focused on fintech. I've published a lot of reports about Africa, including two of the ones you see there, the Health Tech Unicorns report and the Healthcare Financing report. We also have another report on mergers and acquisitions in Africa as well. And I do a ton of video courses on venture capital asset class and investing in Africa that I'd invite you to watch on my YouTube. So Africa's healthcare opportunity, I've got to talk about healthcare because that's where I started. The IFC says that Africa actually has the poorest healthcare outcomes in the world. And that's sad, but we do believe that it's an opportunity. That $66 billion gap in healthcare financing in Africa is a huge opportunity. And if you look at healthcare as a sector, in America, 1 in 13 Americans work for a hospital. So healthcare is not just a sector that provides better healthcare. It's also a massive generator of employment. If you think about the UK NHS, the healthcare system in the UK, it's the biggest employer in Europe, the 6th biggest employer in the world. A lot of people in Africa are unemployed, so I see healthcare as a mechanism not to just make people healthier, but to lift people out of poverty and give them jobs too. When you think about fintech, what you think Africa? Africa, without a doubt, is the world's most innovative fintech market. 70% of all mobile money transactions take place on the continent. We have 1.1 billion Africans, and 66 of them are unbanked. The 66% of them are unbanked or underbanked. Now, 7 reasons to invest in Africa. Number 1, rapid urbanization. According to the United Nations, the rate of urbanization, people moving from rural areas to urban areas, was approximately 43% in 2015, and it rose to 56%, or will rise to 56% in 2050. Urbanization often leads to a growing consumer market as people move to the cities en masse, increasing their purchasing power and demand for goods. Investors can tap into this urban consumer base by targeting sectors such as retail, housing, healthcare, transport, and entertainment. Number 2 reason to invest in Africa, mobile phone and internet access and penetration. According to data from the World Bank, mobile phone penetration in Africa reached 80% in 2019. Showing the significant adoption and usage of mobile phones on the continent. The growing number of mobile phone users creates a vast consumer base for various products and services, including mobile apps. Number 3, demographics. The average age in some parts of Europe is 50. The average age in Africa is 19. There are going to be more babies born in Nigeria this year than in the whole of Europe. And when I lived in Japan, as I mentioned earlier, I realized that there are more adult diapers sold in Japan than children's diapers. And when you think back to that story that I told about China, that rapidly growing population really drove their economic growth. And the people that got in early were able to really get the economic as well as impact rewards of investing in this fast-growing area of the world. And I see that this is beginning to happen in Africa again. And it will be so interesting in terms of impact and in terms of economic returns for investors that get in at this stage where we're at the beginning of the curve. The consumer market. According to a report by McKinsey & Company, consumer spending in Africa is projected to reach 2.1 trillion by 2025, representing a compound annual growth rate of 8%. This growth rate is higher than most of the world, and Africa's youthful population represents a significant consumer class with increasing consumer spending and power, purchasing power. Number 5, diversification. If you watch my video on why invest in startups or how to invest in startups, I talk about portfolio theory and diversification a lot, and how most financial advisors would advise their clients and advise people to make sure that they have pots of investments in different regions, because you never really for sure know where you're going to get your returns from. So number 5 is about diversification and about making sure that your investments are spread across different regions of the world. So whichever region is fast growing at a particular time, you get to get the returns from that particular region. Number 6, innovation. I am almost 100% sure, based on my experiences on the continent, based on interactions with the ecosystem, based on my deep knowledge of technology and technology products in Africa, that the next wave of global innovation will come from this continent. When I look at ecosystems like North America and Israel and Singapore that receive close to $1,000 per person in venture capital funding, compared to Africa that receives just $1 or $2 on average in venture capital per person, but yet Africa and African companies have developed some of the most innovative fintech companies in the entire world. There's no clearer demonstration of the innovative capacity on the continent. And I think this is a massive arbitrage opportunity that shows that investing in Africa is investing in the future of innovation. Impact. It's the biggest and most innovative fintech market in the world right now. And when I use the term biggest, I mean biggest in terms of some of the biggest companies coming out of it. When you look at companies like Wave, companies like Flutterwave, companies like Paystack, even in terms of performance financially, you can see that, and in terms of number of transactions, you can see that these are super rapidly growing companies. And that's a testament to the innovative potential. When I talk about biggest, I also talk about the number of mobile money transactions. Like I said, 70% of all the world's mobile money transactions occur in sub-Saharan Africa. The world's first truly sort of digital currency, M-Pesa, was sort of initiated in Kenya. Not in North America or Europe or Asia like you'd expect. But despite the dynamism of the economy and despite the innovation and despite the entrepreneurial nature, Africa is still the poorest continent in the world. Investing in Africa will create jobs. It will lift people sustainably out of poverty in a different way than philanthropic giving or charity. This creates real companies. And I always say that there's no such thing as a non-profit. Every non-profit or charity collects money from people that are making a profit. So it's important for African companies to receive investment and make profits so that they can give to their own non-profits. And we also spoke about in my last video on venture capital and the economy, just how many jobs venture capital backed companies have created. For just 0.1% of American GDP that has gone into venture capital, it's produced 11% of jobs. Extraordinary returns in terms of economic returns and impact. The venture capital asset class has created more jobs and economic growth in the past few years than any other type of investment, and that's super exciting as number 7. So I've spoken about rapid urbanization. I've spoken about mobile phone penetration. I've spoken about the demographics. I've spoken about the growing consumer market. I've spoken about the opportunity that Africa gives for diversification in your portfolios. I've spoken about innovation. Like I said, I believe that Africa is the future of innovation and the most innovative financial services markets on the face of the earth. I've also spoken about impact in terms of jobs and lifting people out of poverty. I'm going to briefly speak about my fund. We see 300 deals per quarter. We have done 25 deals. We have had 1 exit. We have 10 companies that have raised nearly $80 million in follow-on capital. We have 25 warehouse deals that have already been done that are coming into the fund, and the combined portfolio value now is nearly $1 billion. And we invest only in health tech and fintech, and that's why I've spoken about health tech and fintech a lot in this presentation. And in terms of our impact, because I spoke about impact in the presentation as well, we've created 13,000 direct and indirect jobs, 49% of the women that work, the people that work in our portfolio companies are women. Also, 50% of the founders that we've invested in are also women. And we have nearly 1 million users over 10 countries. So if you want to learn more about venture capital, fixed income, project finance, then follow me on LinkedIn. My name is Dr. Ola Brown there, or on Twitter at NigerFlyingDoctor, or send me an email and I'll be happy to respond. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation on investing in Africa. It's something that I'm super passionate about, and I hope that I have transferred that passion to you. Look forward to hearing from you soon.